Black teenage defendant boy interrupts judge during trial. What he says. Next. Shocks. Part 1. Thomas Baker sat quietly in the wooden chair that felt too big for his 16-year-old frame. The courtroom was cold and unwelcoming, with its high ceilings and stern faces staring down at him. For 3 long days, Thomas hadn't spoken a word as people talked about him like he wasn't even there. Thomas was accused of stealing expensive computer equipment from his school's science lab. The prosecutor, a tall man named Mr. Phillips, spoke in a loud voice about how Thomas was just another troubled boy from Oakwood Estate, the poorer part of town where Thomas lived with his mom. "Look at his record," Mr. Phillips had said earlier that day. "Always in detention. Late to class, this is not a model student." What nobody in the courtroom knew was that Thomas wasn't late because he was lazy. He was late because he helped his little sister get ready for school every morning since their mom, Linda, had to leave early for her cleaning job at the hospital. Thomas's lawyer, Mr. Gordon, barely looked at him. He spent most of his time checking his watch or writing notes that Thomas couldn't see. Once, Thomas had tried to explain about the permission slip, but Mr. Gordon had just shushed him. "Let me handle this," he had said. But he wasn't handling it at all. The truth was simple. Thomas had permission to use the school computers after hours. His science teacher, Mr. Williams, had signed a form allowing Thomas to work on his special project, a computer program that could help doctors spot early signs of certain illnesses. Mr. Williams believed in Thomas. He said Thomas had a gift for science that didn't come along often, but then Mr. Williams had a heart attack 2 days after signing the permission slip. He was still in hospital, and no one could reach him. The signed paper was at home, tucked in Thomas's science notebook because Mr. Gordon had said they didn't need it. Character witnesses are stronger, Mr. Gordon had insisted. But none of Thomas's character witnesses had shown up. In the back of the courtroom, Linda Baker twisted, her hands in her lap. She had dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts to pay for this lawyer who hardly seemed to care. She caught Thomas's eye and tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Judge Helen Roberts looked down at her papers. She was known as the Hammer because she was so strict about rules in her courtroom. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly and her glasses sat on the end of her nose. "We will now hear from the final witness," she announced. Thomas felt his heart sink. The final witness was the school security guard who had found him in the computer lab that night. The guard had already made up his mind about Thomas before ever speaking to him. Thomas looked at the jury, 12 people who would decide his future. They looked bored, like they had already made up their minds too. If found guilty, Thomas would lose his place in the science program. The university that had shown interest in him would move on. His future, the one he had worked so hard for, staying up late studying while his friends were out having fun, would vanish. Something shifted inside Thomas as he watched the security guard take the stand. A quiet voice inside him said, "Enough." If no one else would tell the truth about who he really was, then maybe it was time he spoke for himself. Just as the guard was about to speak, Thomas stood up. The wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Young man," Judge Roberts said sharply, "you will sit down immediately." The entire courtroom went silent. Mr. Gordon pulled at Thomas's sleeve, trying to make him sit down, but Thomas remained standing. For the first time in 3 days, people were actually looking at him, not through him. "Your Honor," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly steady despite his pounding heart. "Before you continue, I need to speak." The end, part 2. Judge Roberts frowned at Thomas. Her face turned slightly red. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Baker," she said firmly. "You have counsel to speak on your behalf." Mr. Gordon pulled harder at Thomas's sleeve. "Sit down," he whispered urgently. "You're making things worse." Thomas looked directly at the judge. "With respect, Your Honor," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "No one in this room is actually speaking for me. No one has told the truth about who I am." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment, her fingers frozen above the keys. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Judge Roberts tapped her pen against her desk. Something in the boy's calm dignity made her pause. You have 30 seconds, she said finally. Mr. Gordon buried his face in his hands. Thomas took a deep breath. I didn't steal anything, he began. I had permission to use the computers after school. Mr. Williams gave me written permission because I'm working on a medical program that could help doctors. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. The OY. Defendant cannot just— Mr. Phillips, the judge cut him off. I have given the young man 30 seconds. Please sit down, Thomas continued quickly. Mr. Williams had a heart attack right after he signed my permission form. That's why no one could reach him. The form is at my house because Mr. Gordon said we didn't need it. Mr. Gordon's head snapped up. That's not true, he protested weakly. It is true, Thomas said firmly. My mom can get the form. It's in my science notebook at home. Judge Roberts looked at Linda Baker, who was already standing up. Your Honor, I can go home and get it. Right now, Linda said, her voice shaking with emotion. The judge checked her watch. We will take a 30-minute recess. Mrs. Baker, please retrieve this permission form if it exists. Mr. Phillips and Mr. Gordon in my chambers now. As the courtroom began to buzz with whispers, Thomas sat down again. His legs felt weak, but for the first time in days, he felt a tiny spark of hope. In the hallway outside the judge's chambers, Thomas overheard Mr. Phillips arguing with Mr. Gordon. Did you know about this permission form? Mr. Phillips demanded. The boy mentioned something, but it seemed like a weak defense, Mr. Gordon mumbled. Character witnesses seemed stronger. Then where are they? Mr. Phillips asked sharply. Thomas couldn't hear the answer. 25 minutes later, Linda Baker rushed back into the courtroom, clutching Thomas's worn science notebook. Her face was flushed from running, but her eyes were bright with determination. She handed the notebook to the court officer, who passed it to Judge Roberts. The judge carefully opened it to where a folded paper was tucked inside. The courtroom was silent as she read the paper. Thomas held his breath. Finally, Judge Roberts looked up. This appears to be a legitimate permission form, signed by Edward Williams, head of science at Westfield Secondary School. It grants Thomas Baker permission to use the computer lab after hours for work on his medical diagnostic program. She turned to Mr. Phillips. Has anyone from the prosecution attempted to contact Mr. Williams at the hospital? Mr. Phillips shifted uncomfortably. We were told he was unavailable, Your Honor. Unavailable is not the same as unreachable, Judge Roberts said sharply. She turned to her assistant. Please call City Hospital immediately. I want to speak to Mr. Williams if he is able to talk. As they waited for the call, Thomas looked at his mother. She reached across the divider and squeezed his hand quickly before the court officer could stop her. Whatever happens, she whispered, I'm proud of you for speaking up. The End, Part 3. 10 minutes later, the court officer returned with a message. Mr. Williams was awake and able to speak by phone. Judge Roberts ordered the call to be put on speaker so everyone in the courtroom could hear. Mr. Williams, Judge Roberts said clearly, this is Judge Helen Roberts from the Crown Court. I'm calling about one of your students, Thomas Baker. There was a pause, and then a weak but clear voice replied, Thomas, is he all right? Mr. Williams, Thomas is in my courtroom. He's been accused of stealing computer equipment from the school lab. He claims you gave him permission to use this equipment after hours. Is this true? Of course it's true, Mr. Williams replied, sounding surprised, and a bit stronger now. Thomas is working on a brilliant medical program. I gave him written permission to use the lab whenever he needed. The headmaster approved it too. Mr. Phillips looked shocked. The jury members exchanged glances. Can you describe the nature of Thomas's project? Judge Roberts asked. It's remarkable, Mr. Williams said, his voice filled with pride. Thomas created a program that can help doctors spot early signs of certain illnesses by analyzing patterns in medical data. At 16, the boy is a genius. Mr. Williams coughed, and everyone could hear hospital machines beeping in the background. Should rest now, he said. But please, whatever you do, don't let this mistake ruin Thomas's future. He has so much to offer the world. After the call ended, Judge Roberts looked at Thomas with new eyes. "Mr. Baker," she said, "I believe we owe you an apology. It seems there has been a serious misunderstanding." She turned to Mr. Gordon with a cold stare. "And a serious failure of legal representation." Mr. Gordon sank lower in his chair. Judge Roberts then addressed Mr. Phillips. "Does the prosecution wish to continue with this case?" Mr. Phillips stood up, straightening his tie. "In light of this new evidence, Your Honor, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Thomas Baker." A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Thomas felt his shoulders relax for the first time in days. "Motion granted," Judge Roberts said firmly. She looked at Thomas directly. "Mr. Baker, all charges against you are hereby dismissed." Thomas's mom began to cry quietly, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth. As people began to leave the courtroom, a tall man in a suit approached Thomas. He handed Thomas a business card. "My name is Robert Wilson. I'm from Cambridge University," he said. "A friend of mine is a court reporter. He called me about what happened here today. We've been looking for young talents in medical technology. I'd like to hear more about your program." Thomas stared at the card in disbelief. Cambridge University, his dream school. I would be honored, sir," Thomas managed to say. As they left the courtroom, Thomas saw Judge Roberts watching them. She gave him a small nod, and for the first time, there was a hint of a smile on her face. Outside in the sunshine, Thomas took a deep breath of fresh air. His mother hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry I didn't get that form earlier," she whispered. Mr. Gordon said. "It's okay, Mum," Thomas said. "It all worked out in the end." Mr. Wilson was waiting by his car. "Shall we discuss your future, Thomas?" he asked. Thomas smiled. "Maybe sometimes you had to stand up and speak for yourself, even when everyone told you to stay quiet." The end, part 4. 3 months after the trial, Thomas sat in the waiting room at Cambridge University. The walls were covered with pictures of famous scientists and past students who had changed the world. Thomas's fingers tapped nervously on his laptop case. Mr. Wilson opened the door and smiled. "They're ready for you, Thomas." Thomas followed him into a large room where 5 professors sat at a long table. His medical program was already loaded onto the big screen behind them. "Mr. Baker," said Professor Mary Hampton, the head of the Medical Technology Department, "we've been reviewing your work. Please explain how you developed this program." Thomas took a deep breath. He thought about that moment in the courtroom, when he had found his voice. He could do this too. "It started when my grandmother got sick," Thomas explained. "The doctors didn't catch her illness until it was very serious. I kept thinking there must be a way to spot these things earlier." As Thomas explained the program, the professors leaned forward in their chairs. They asked questions that Thomas answered clearly and confidently. When he finished, Professor Hampton smiled. "Mr. Baker, this is remarkable work for someone of any age, let alone a 16-year-old. We would like to offer you a place in our special Young Scholars program next year." Thomas could hardly believe his ears. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you so much." As Thomas and Mr. Wilson left the building, Thomas's phone rang. It was Mr. Williams. "How did it go?" his teacher asked eagerly. "They offered me a place," Thomas said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I knew they would," Mr. Williams replied. "I'm proud of you, Thomas." That evening, Thomas arrived home to find an unexpected visitor sitting in their small living room. It was Judge Roberts. "Your Honor?" Thomas said in surprise. "And what are you doing here?" Judge Roberts stood up. She wasn't wearing her court robes now, just a simple blue dress. "I came to apologize properly," she said, "and to make you an offer." She explained that she had started a program to help young people from Oakwood Estate. She wanted Thomas to be the first mentor. "Your story has inspired a lot of people," she said, "including me. Sometimes the system fails the very people it's meant to protect. We need to change that." Thomas looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored," Thomas said. The next day at school, things were different. Teachers who had once ignored Thomas now stopped to talk to him. Students who had never noticed him before asked about his program. At lunch, Thomas sat at his usual corner table. To his surprise, Emily Parker, one of the most popular girls in school, sat down across from him. "Is it true you're going to Cambridge?" she asked. "Next year," Thomas replied, still not used to the attention. "That's really cool," Emily said. "My brother has diabetes. I was wondering, could your program help with that?" Thomas smiled. "Actually, yes, I've been working on a new version that might help predict blood sugar changes before they happen." "Could you show me sometime?" Emily asked. Before Thomas could answer, the school principal appeared at their table. "Thomas," he said awkwardly, "the school board would like to speak with you. They want to create a new science program. They'd like your input." Thomas nodded, thinking how much had changed in 3 months, all because he had found the courage to stand up and speak his truth. The end, Part 5. 1 year later, Thomas stood on a stage at the National Young Scientist Award ceremony. The large hall was filled with important people from the worlds of science, medicine, and education. Thomas adjusted his tie nervously as he waited to be introduced. In the front row sat his mother, wearing her best dress. Next to her was Mr. Williams, fully recovered and beaming with pride. Judge Roberts sat on the other side, along with 5 teenagers from Oakwood Estate who were part of the mentoring program Thomas had helped create. "Our next speaker," announced the host, "is Thomas Baker, whose medical diagnostic program is already being tested in 3 major hospitals. At just 17 years old, he is our youngest ever finalist." As Thomas walked to the microphone, he remembered the scared boy who had stood up in court a year ago. That seemed like a different person now. "Thank you," Thomas began. "My journey started in a courtroom, not a laboratory." Thomas told his story simply but powerfully. He explained how close he had come to losing everything because of a misunderstanding, how finding his voice had changed his life. "But this isn't just my story," Thomas continued. "It's about all the brilliant young minds in places like Oakwood Estate who never get the chance to show what they can do." He looked at the 5 teenagers from his neighborhood. "This program isn't just about finding the next great scientist. It's about making sure everyone has a voice even when the world tries to silence them." After the ceremony, a tall man in an expensive suit approached Thomas. He introduced himself as David Miller, the head of one of the biggest technology companies in the country. "Your program could save thousands of lives," Mr. Miller said. "We'd like to offer you a job after you finish university, with a very generous salary." Thomas thanked him, but explained that he had other plans. "I'm going to take my program to places that can't afford expensive medical equipment," he said, starting with the community clinic in Oakwood. Mr. Miller looked surprised but impressed. "The world needs more people like you, Thomas." Later that evening, Thomas and his mother walked home through the streets of Oakwood Estate. Some of the buildings were still run down, but there were signs of positive change. The community center had a new computer lab, funded partly by Judge Roberts' program. "Did you ever think," Linda asked, "when you stood up in that courtroom that this is where we'd be a year later?" Thomas shook his head. "I just knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." As they reached their flat, Thomas saw new posters in the window of the community center. They showed Thomas's face above the words, "Find your voice. Change your world." Inside their home, Thomas went to his room and opened his laptop. An email notification appeared from Cambridge University. His special program was starting next month. Thomas thought about all the people who had believed in him when he needed it most. Mr. Williams, Judge Roberts, his mother always. And he thought about the moments when you have to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. The moments when you have to find the courage to speak, even when the whole world seems to be telling you to stay quiet. Thomas smiled as he began typing a reply to Cambridge. The future was bright, and his voice was strong. The end.